and welcome to Policy and Politics with me, Tarun Nangia. India and South Korea both jointly have set a target that our trade should be about $50 billion. And if you see that South Korean brands are like the kings of Indian market. Hyundai has emerged as the second largest car manufacturer of India. Samsung virtually is a king in consumer electronics. And if you see in the trade of these two countries, India exports a lot of raw material and agricultural goods, some petroleum products, but mainly what comes from South Korea is a lot of finished products. And can India, in a sense, we have a deficit of about $8 billion in the total trade between these two countries, India and South Korea. Can we even, reduce that deficit? That is going to be a challenge for India as the trade increases. And South Korea, as we all know, is taking lead in technology. You see the latest of the Samsung products, which just fly off the shelves in Indian electronic stores as well as on Amazon and Flipkart. So in such an atmosphere where India, in a sense, has not invested in research and development, what is going to be India's position 5 years from now? To discuss this, I have got a very special guest. He is Ambassador Skand Tayal, our former ambassador to South Korea. Mr. Tayal, thank you so much for giving us your time for today's episode of Policy and Politics. Your opening comments to start. What explains the South Korea success story? They came, like for example, Hyundai comes to India 20 years ago and emerges as the second largest car manufacturer.
See, in many ways, India and Korea are similar. We share the Independence Day, 15th August. Both have a decolonial legacy. Korea was under Japan, India was under the British. And at the time of independence, they became independent in 45, we in 47. In fact, Korea was poorer than us, technologically less advanced than us.
Poorer and less technology.
Poorer and less advanced. In the 60s, we had supplied railway wagons to Korea. We had supplied heavy water. Our Atomic Energy Commission and the whole process was much more advanced. But look where they have come. Now their per capita income is 31,000 US dollars. We are at about 3,000 maybe. So what are the reasons? And when I was ambassador there, really I tried to understand what are the reasons. And perhaps one can put them in 2 or 3 categories. One, the human resource development. They spend a lot of money on education. And from 20% literacy, very quickly, within 2-3 decades, they come to 90-95%.
So they have 95% literacy?
And they gave a lot of emphasis on vocational education. So that they had the trained manpower when the mechanization started in 60s and 70s and when they started emerging as a manufacturing hub. Then, of course, their work ethics is very, very good. They are very diligent. They are very punctual. If an office or a workplace starts at 8 o'clock, 5 to 8, everybody is at his place. And they are very honest in their work surroundings. Second, the government has always been very proactive in anticipating change. In 1969, when electronics industry was starting, they established a commission that how to advance electronic industry. They created special hubs for electronics. They asked their 2 institutes they created just for research and development. And like that, it kept on happening. Right now, their emphasis is on, say, green technologies, solar energy, car batteries. So they anticipate in solar, the small cells and all, LG is the best. And third, they had a very good set of industrialists who had that hunger. And they established these names which you are mentioning. They are called chaebols. They are huge conglomerates like our Ambanis and Tatas, big conglomerates. And they had this capacity to take risk, and they really started this manufacturing and took the Korean name all over
But I have a question here see, when I see a product from Samsung, say the phone, and for our viewers, I would like to share that Samsung is the supplier of mobile screens to Apple also. So in a sense, it has emerged as a supplier of key components to big companies like Apple, and even in R&D, they are a leader. How come South Korea can develop original products? For example, if I take this phone in my hand, which is an Apple iPhone, now America produces, in a sense, it's designed in California, so they, in a sense, this is an American product. But South Koreans have got Samsung, Chinese have got Vivo, Oppo, MI and Huawei, but India does not have any such products. So do you think we in a sense have failed at what the South Koreans succeeded in research and development?
South Korea spends about 4.2% of their GDP on research and development and innovation, 4.2%. Israel is about 4.1%, China is about 3.8%, India is at about 1%. And when we spend 1% of GDP, most of it is done by the government sector in CSIR or universities, etc., which very little commercial application. Whereas in Korea, only 30% of R&D expenditure out of this 4.2% GDP is by the government, 70% is by the private sector. So they give the researchers, the scientists a problem. This is to be done and you sort it out, and they give the money, and that has immediate commercial application, and they look at the future also. So that is a fundamental difference between our R&D and our industry and our economy and the Korean economy. And somehow our industry also finds it easier just to buy technology and do some transfer of technology, and they do not innovate, do not improve upon it. Whereas in Korea as well as in China, they buy technology once, but after that they improve upon the technology themselves by their own effort. So there is a fundamental difference between the approach of a Korean or a Chinese industrialist or a manufacturer and Indian manufacturer.
But if the question is now to have a trade target of $50 billion with South Korea by 2030, I want to understand from you one thing. For example, we export things like petroleum products and sesame to South Korea. Unless India invests in research and development, do you think the future for India is dark in a sense, because we might end up having huge deficits?
That is the danger, that our products are not competent, or they can't compete both in quality and in price, because the Chinese goods are cheaper than us, even if our quality may be better. So to expect that we can have a lot of export of manufactured goods to Korea, I think is not
realistic. It's going to be difficult. Unless we do some, do you think R&D spending is the key? Unless that happens, do you think?
There are two things, R&D spending and scale. You will see that all these companies which are successful globally, they are very large companies. Samsung Electronics has a turnover of 220 billion US dollars.
Which is what, 15 lakh crores?
Which 15 lakh, one company.
One company.
So they can invest a lot of money in R&D, they can market, they can advertise, they can capture the market, they can control the market. But Indian companies do not have that scale. So that will be another disadvantage. Of course, they can come up to that scale because the Indian market itself is so big.
Yes.
But they are perhaps not ambitious enough, or they are quite satisfied in whatever they are doing and they are selling, because that the competition is very tough. And when I was in Korea, the Korean leaders used to say that what they did to Japan, their fear is that China will do to them.
Okay.
In the sense that they outpriced the Japanese. The Korean company, the Toyota, the Sony, yes, they could not sell in Indian market because the Korean goods were equally good.
Yes,
and cheaper. Now China is doing the same thing. Samsung Electronics, the Samsung handset is now being replaced by the Chinese Huawei.
Yes.
The Korean handset, they had about 60-70% on the Indian market, which has come down to 30%.
Because of Chinese, Oppo, Vivo and MI. These companies are taking over. But still, I see there is a hunger among South Korean companies to compete with China and retain their share in the Indian market. Of course, in consumer durables, they remain very strong.
Right.
Do you think India is not even mentioned except as a market for these goods? Is that a challenge for India, that India is just seen as a market, not as a competitor of manufacturing? So there is no expectation that there will be a good that will come from India that will compete against these companies.
It's a huge challenge, and somewhere our manufacturing is found wanting. I'll give you an example. When I wanted to buy, make in India and all that fervor was there. So I wanted to buy an air conditioner, and I bought a Indian company's very well-known, famous company, old company.
Yes.
But later I came to know that the compressor was made in China, and only that cover was made in India. So somewhere our companies are lacking the desire and the capacity to really manufacture a large part of their product in India, and they find it easier to trade to get the main component from outside, whether Korea or like Videocon used to get its transmission thing, Videocon TV from Korea.
Okay, so I would like to know from you, in a sense, what is Indian challenges? Is it not investing in research and development? Is that the Indian challenge, or is literacy India's challenge, or is the challenge of India is much greater that our systems are complex? That's why a lot of foreign companies don't want to come and make here, but rather export. So I'll give you an example. Even in mobile manufacturing, a lot of mobiles are assembled in India, but those parts are not produced. So the net value addition is just about 5% or maybe 2%, because you're getting in parts and screwing them up. So do you think that is the worry for India?
Somewhere there is something lacking in the manufacturing environment of India. Of course, the ease of doing business index we are improving, but still on the ground there are a lot of difficulties. The Korean investment is now shifting from China. They want to hedge their bets because China, US spat is there. And for the last 3-4 years, they have selected Vietnam. And so there is about $40 billion investment, Korean investment in Vietnam, whereas only about $7 billion in India.
So $40 billion versus 6?
In Vietnam. Why? They say that if they decide to invest in Vietnam, from the date of their decision to coming to manufacturing will be 12 to 18 months.
Okay.
Whereas in India, it takes at least 3 years. And that is a valuable time which they lose. And unless that is fixed, their preference for investment would be Vietnam or
so you mean investments are not coming to India, or are coming in less quantity, in a sense, saying 6 billion versus 40 billion, and Vietnam is such a small country, but still it is getting a lion's share of the investment.
Yes, because most of foreign investment is now coming in India in services sector or bank or in, not really in manufacturing. One success has been there. Kia has established one manufacturing greenfield company. $1 billion, and the Andhra Pradesh government, I think they're very happy with their, within 18 months they could produce, but we need more such examples.
So you mean to say, will states set an example? Will states have to be competitive for India to grow? Because India as a whole is a very big country. To put numbers in perspective, Korea is about 1 lakh square kilometers. India is more than 30 lakh square kilometers. So that country is just about 1/30th the size of India, but they are, if I'm not wrong, their GDP is about
31,000. No, 1.6 trillion.
1.6 trillion. It's for such a small country, and the average Korean is about 15 times more richer than an average Indian. So we are about $2,000 per capita. They are $31,000 per capita. So how does India now? Because the age of artificial intelligence is now upon us. Do you think India's demographic dividend, which was in this cheap labor, is now in fact turned on its head and has become a problem now?
One looks at the future trends and more robotization and artificial intelligence, etc. It is inevitable that the labor in factories will be replaced. Even office workers, etc. will be replaced. So that is a different story altogether.
Yes.
But even in manufacturing, unless our states start competing among themselves and offer real ease of doing business, then only we have some chance of attracting foreign capital and also helping our industry, because the total cost of manufacturing in India goes up because of regulations, because of lots of difficulties at the lower level. Functionaries who keep on demanding from the manufacturer all kinds of favors, rent seeking in different forms. That has unfortunately not disappeared, as all of our friends or your viewers who are in business, who are in manufacturing, they know what I am talking about.
So even at the state level, things need to improve, because that's where the plants
delivery level. The center is doing a lot, but the state level.
So very good point by Ambassador Tayal, that center government is doing a lot, but at the state level is where the plants will come, because the land is with the states, and that is where, if the turnaround time means from the day a South Korean company announces that they want to set up a plant, and if it can be set up in 12 or 18 months or 22 months, that is when we will be competing with countries like Vietnam. And he made a very important point, saying that South Korea has invested $40 billion in Vietnam, whereas India just got $6 billion. This gives a lot of fodder for a lot of people in the power corridors to think that where and why are we losing out. At this juncture, I'll take a short break and be right back. Welcome back. Just before the break, Ambassador Tayal highlighted that research and development is a key area where South Korea succeeded, especially in the private sector, because he also had a grouse that Indian private sector companies don't invest enough in R&D, and that is also the reason that we are not even a manufacturing superpower. But also there are issues with the startup culture. Why could South Korea in a sense come up with companies like Hyundai and Samsung, whereas Indian companies are not being able to sell globally? In that sense, we are a leader in software services, but as the service sector, manufacturing is what is the government's focus now. And we'll now stick to South Korea. So if you see South Korea in a sense, and India is a sense, we are even importing steel from South Korea. We, for making cars, we don't even make our own steel. Of course, some manufacturers do supply steel for making cars in India too. But on a whole, if you see, India has emerged as a leading supplier of raw material and importer of finished goods. Do you think India needs a policy shift?
India certainly needs a policy shift and good implementation of those policies. So, more and more technology, of course, can be imported once, but how it can be improved upon in-house or with the help of institutions, there has to be more focus so that we do not end up constantly importing technology and improving the products, whether it is steel, whether it is anything which we make, whether it is any car. The company should not just rest on their laurels. They have to keep on improving their models,
innovation has to be
innovation. Now, South Korea, there is a Bloomberg Innovation Index. South Korea is at number 1.
Number 1 in the world?
Israel is at number 2. China is at number 16 and India is at number 54. So they keep on innovating, and that's how they have the edge. And that is where we have to reach. We are not there, but government can bring together some of the companies. And what the Koreans had done, that they identified some leaders for different sectors. They said, Hyundai, okay, you focus on automobiles. They told Samsung and LG, you focus on electronics and consumer durables. They asked some other couple of companies to focus on shipbuilding. So they created leaders. They were not 100 small players. So government was very actively collaborating with the private sector. They are so-called chaebols, which you know.
Yes.
Samsung Electronics itself has 220 billion US dollar turnover sales.
It's about 15 lakh crores.
15 lakh crores. So they are huge companies. And they were established with the help of the government. Government gave them cheap credit, they gave them land, they made sure that labor doesn't create too much problem. But it was very outcome oriented. If that company did not deliver, the loans were called back by the government and the banks, and the ownership was transferred to some other person. So the entire culture in Korea is very outcome oriented, and government and industry work very closely together.
So you mean India's advantage in a sense you see is because we have a huge population, but we have a huge market, but per se you see things don't see changing unless the R&D spend goes up.
That's right, and the entire environment of manufacturing sector to work, it should be every agency in India, whether it is courts, whether it is regulatory agencies, they are very happy to say no and stop somebody from doing business or stop that factory from...
And that is a problem.
That is a problem. It is not a helpful attitude. It is not a cooperative attitude.
Now, could you dwell about 2 minutes on India-South Korea relations in trade and foreign affairs?
See, India and South Korea, we are strategic partners. So, the strategy-wise, we see the international environment, we are very close to each other. And both are working together, but the core of the relationship is the economy. We expect the second wave of Korean investment now. You know, first wave came in the late 90s. Samsung, LG, Hyundai, Doosan, they all came in 98 onwards. Now, Koreans are ready because our market is huge. But still they find that there are difficulties in coming and the decision making is very slow. You know, all of us know the huge fiasco of POSCO. It was supposed to be a $15 billion investment in our steel sector, which would have really improved our steel making. And the Koreans say that once that steel was available, that even shipbuilding could have come.
But the steel, the plant couldn't be set up.
Plant has now been
Shelved, I guess.
Shelved, absolutely shelved, because of our own issues of environment and etc.
So, I mean, India, in a sense, needs to prioritize. If the investment is coming in sectors like specialty steel, India needs to prioritize.
India needs to prioritize, because on its back, other sectors will develop.
Right.
Now,
so it is not just a matter of one steel plant, it is a lot of other things.
And Koreans are very good in processes, that they have the technology that how to cut short the time, and like if they order steel from a ship plant, from a steel plant for a shipbuilding, they give the size, and the steel cut in that particular size comes to the shipyard.
Right.
In India, the shipyard cuts the steel to the required size.
Because I want to understand one more thing, sir, that if you look at Samsung, LG, Hyundai, they have emerged as market leaders in India. But are there any Indian companies which are market leaders in South Korea?
No, unfortunately none. Because whatever industry is there, it is by merger, M&A, merger and acquisition.
Yes, like Mahindra's have acquired.
Like Mahindra's, SsangYong, there was a motor company. But they have retained the name SsangYong, and they are still marketing with SsangYong. And even Tata Motors had bought a company from
the steel sector.
In the truck sector.
Okay.
In Kunsan.
Yes.
But they are also market. So it is not that some Indian original product is being made in Korea.
So you mean to say India as a country, you dwelled upon R&D, you shared the R&D innovation index, but you're also saying that it worries you that we are exporting more of raw materials and not finished goods.
Of course, and our industry, even Jaguar was purchased by Tatas. So it is not that one of
we are developing a product.
We are developing a product and are establishing a factory abroad to manufacture that product.
Yes.
And that is a worry. We are a country of 1.3 billion people.
We have
a huge economy. We have to produce something. We have to give something to the world, that this is something which is coming out of India.
Right.
The only product abroad which is known by some Indian name is Jaipur Foot.
Right.
For cheap orthopedic replacement.
So, in a sense, how do you see these two countries progressing in trade? Do you see, with the RCEP coming in, do you see any friction ahead, or do you think things will be smooth? Because, of course, India has its own concerns on RCEP.
I think I see huge friction ahead, because there is a conflict between our very correct desire to have more make in India.
Yes.
And as well as free trade. Yes. RCEP means free trade. If the tariff is reduced further than what it is, can you imagine what will happen to the Indian market? When Chinese goods do not have a preference in tariff, then the market is flooded with Chinese goods. If they get a preference in tariff, then what will happen? Similarly with the Korean goods. We already have a SEPA with them, so already there is a duty reduction is there. If it is further reduced, then that will really kill our manufacturing sector. So the government is in the horns of a huge dilemma, and it is not easy to manage this.
So in a sense, in the RCEP, Ambassador Tayal shares with us, there is a worry, because if zero-rated duties are implemented in free trade, then will even these companies of South Korea invest in India and setting up plants? Because
no, why should they?
They will not invest.
They will not.
And India will suffer. So absolutely. You think it will be a tough call for the Indian government on this?
It is. It is a very tough call for the Indian government.
On this note, we will end this episode. We will like to revisit this episode because the RCEP meeting happens again in 2 months. But with regards to South Korea, definitely the target is of $50 billion. But unless India manufactures goods like the iPhone or the Samsung phone or something like the MI, Vivo, Oppo, which is Indian made and manufactured, we have something original to sell to the world, then India can succeed. Otherwise, India in the next 5 years is expected to have a lot of problems in the global trade environment, because with things like RCEP, trade may be free, but if it's free, then who will invest in India? That all will be a worrying situation. We'll see how the situation develops, but I would like to thank Ambassador Tayal for his time for joining us today. Thank you viewers for watching this episode of Policy and Politics. Thank you.